Hello and welcome to the AHR podcast, where we engage in captivating conversations about the built environment and its influence on shaping a more positive future. I'm Victoria Shepherdson, a member of AHR's healthcare sector group and an architect in our Bristol studio. In today's episode, we'll be discussing decarbonisation of the healthcare estate and the huge task the NHS faces in going net zero. The NHS contributes to around 4% of the total UK emissions, although huge progress has been made with a carbon reduction of 19% since 2007. I'm joined here today by Gareth Banks, AHR Healthcare Sector Lead, and Des Keighan, Assistant Director of Estates at Swansea Bay University Health Board. Hello, welcome Des. Can you tell me a bit about your role at Swansea and what decarbonisation fits into this?
Hi, I'm Operational Lead for Estates within the Health Board. So my portfolio covers operational maintenance services, energy, environment, security, ISO 14001, and I also get involved with our private finance initiative. And I've been lead on decarb since about 2014, 15. It's been part of my suite of responsibilities.
That's great. Thank you very much. And again, thank you much for joining us today. And Gareth, could you just introduce yourself, please?
Hi, I'm Gareth Banks. I'm head of the healthcare sector at AHR, practicing architect, been in the business for over 25 years, developed healthcare internationally and nationally.
Thank you, Gareth. Okay, so I think we've probably got quite a lot to cover today. So I think I'll start with you, Des, just a quick question to get the ball rolling. What is the scale of the challenge faced by the health boards and how are you tackling it with yourself at Swansea?
It's a huge challenge. I mean, most of the NHS has got a very varied estate in both age and construction. In Wales, unlike in England, we cover both tertiary, acute, forensic mental health services. So we cover a range of different types of building and estate. The challenge isn't just on the estate itself, but part of the challenge is trying to do these changes operationally. Within Swansea Bay, we've been doing a number of schemes over the last 4 or 5 years, and we've invested nearly 20 million in decarbonisation projects through the refit programme in Wales. We've installed over 100 new AC fans. We've done building management systems in our 2 main acute sites. We've built our own direct wired solar farm, the first in the UK for a hospital facility. We've done the building management systems, repeating myself, and insulation and looking at temperature profiles. But as much as that has saved, and we've demonstrated the saving, the services that we provide have changed so much in the last 3 years that all those savings have been eaten up by new developments in how we provide healthcare as a result of the pandemic. And the other big challenge we've got on top of trying to find funding for the new projects is how we do it in an operational estate. Funding is a major issue. But the problem is that if your hospital is on full capacity and you haven't got any empty rooms, it's very difficult to move patients around to actually facilitate the work. At Swansea Bay, we haven't got a formal decant facility. So where we want to replace the roof, we can, because we can't close the ward because the clinical services are needed. And that's a real challenge. As part of refit, we changed 14,000 light fittings, but we had to do that in a live environment. And we had to change our methods of working to try and deliver the project whilst allowing clinical services to continue.
So, Des, you mentioned there about the fact that your service has changed quite a bit over the last few years. Have you found that that's, I guess there are positives and negatives around both of those things. So I know one of the key elements of the kind of changing healthcare scale, and one of the ways in which we can seek to reduce carbon emissions is by delivering health closer to home. Obviously, the emissions associated with healthcare are not just in the building and the heating and lighting, it's in transport to and from. Do you find that that's made any sort of impact in a positive way, or is that just been more stuff that it's just filling the gaps in almost, really?
In some ways, it is filling the gaps. Procurement is one of our biggest carbon contributors because of the scale of our organisation, not just within Swansea Bay, but the NHS in Wales. The volume of orders and transport and logistics connected with keeping a hospital running is phenomenal. And trying to get companies to respond to that in a positive way is difficult. And we ask in every contract for companies to make carbon commitments, to make commitments about the different legislation in place in Wales. But getting into the nitty-gritty and actually making sure that it isn't just a piece of paper that says, yeah, we're really committed to the Future Generation Act and we really think carbon reduction is important, to actually proving that what they say is true is a real challenge. And as services look to be delivered locally, you've also got this big debate about single-use and multi-use. Should we be single-use because of the infection prevention point of view, compared to recycle, reuse mantra that we're trying to get to maximise resources and reduce carbon from the inbuilt carbon and embedded carbon point of view. So I think services moving closer to home has its benefits, but I think the juggernaut of the NHS is such that we treat illness. That's my own opinion, not a sanctioned opinion. And as a result, we bring people to us traditionally to the hospital to provide care to them. And I think as technology changes and as people's expectations increase, so the demand for services and utilities goes up and up and up because of the diagnostics are becoming far more digitally based, paperless offices, the move to delivering a fully air-conditioned estate as well is coming in from the COVID point of view. A lot of our wards aren't designed fully air-conditioned. They've got central delivery with some extract through windows, whereas now it's, you should have 6 air changes or 10. Every one of those comes with an increased energy demand. And the plant may be far more efficient, but if you didn't have it before you started, it still costs you more. And I think carbon reduction, once you get through the easy things like LED light fittings, BMS, things like that, you get onto things that actually are going to increase your revenue costs. And that's where the real challenge comes, because that's where the commitment from the organisation has to come.
Pretty stunning, really, isn't it? I'm just trying to think as architects where we can sort of really feed into that narrative. I guess there's a level of efficiency. Is there more that we can be doing? I suppose there's some legacy issues, and you've already touched on in terms of replacing light fittings or replacing roofs and such like. Are we getting to a point where, as you say, it's diminishing returns and actually we'd be far better off just going to all new? Or is that still a viable option in terms of saying we will take the space we've got, which has already got the investment in the embodied carbon, so at least we're not dealing with that, and we'll just deal with the running costs? Or to get that sort of level of carbon efficiency that you've mentioned, do we just have to kind of jump in with both feet and go, we're just going to need new buildings to do this, because otherwise it just will not stack up from a revenue perspective beyond anything else?
I think there's 2 answers to that question. It's always far easier if you've got a nice new building to do it right first time rather than retrofit and work around the patients and services you're providing today. But the reality in Wales is there isn't a lot of capital around. There isn't money. And I think public bodies need to work with the commercial sector far more about getting far more savvy about how we can get projects delivered financially outside the traditional paradigms of capital investment. And I think that's a challenge that we're very aware of in Swansea Bay, because we believe we're a good few years in front of a number of the other health boards in Wales on our carbon journey. But we're now at the point where we're not going to save money by what we do. We need investment to reduce carbon. We've got 6 years till 2030, effectively. If we start today, I need around £70 million, and I'd need all 6 years, being honest, to deliver those projects. But I haven't got any capital for next year to do that project. And as we get nearer and nearer to 2030, and political pressure increases for us to deliver these net zero, the number of companies that have the capability to deliver the project and the number of solutions we have, that pool is going to get bigger and bigger demand, and therefore the ability to deliver in the time frame is going to get a far harder challenge.
But you have at Swansea, haven't you, Des, done some really good things in moving towards decarbonisation. I know you've talked a bit about the investment that you guys have made in terms of a solar farm. Can you talk a bit about that and what lessons you have learned from that? Is that possible?
We developed a 4 megawatt solar farm 3 kilometres from the hospital. It was through a discussion with an energy firm. They were building a solar farm in the area. I wanted to see if we wanted to be a client, but that was back in 2016. But procurement rules and discussions dragged on. But in the end, that company, when the government withdrew the feed-in tariffs, dropped out of the market for developing the second half of the solar farm, we took up the option with the landowner and we developed it as part of our refit scheme. And it was meant to save us around 480,000 a year. It's over 1.2 million. Because when we started the project, we could buy electricity at around 16 pence. You can't buy it at 16 pence now. And that increase in cost has helped my department and the health board massively support its financial position, but it's also engendered a desire to do more. And this year, we're expanding that solar farm by a further megawatt, and we're installing a 1/2 megawatt battery to maximise the savings. That solar farm on a nice day powers the entire hospital, but it only works when the sun's shining. or daylight, I should say. You don't need the sun for it to work, and therefore the battery will help us get more out of it. But I think one of the other challenges that a lot of people are going to face is that the national grid is struggling to cope with the demand for renewables. And we've had to work really hard with National Grid to get them to agree that we could extend the solar farm only by 1 megawatt because of the residual fault level status that we're potentially putting into the grid. And I've heard of a number of schemes in Wales where the grid have said, yes, we can do the extension, but it's going to be in 4 years' time. You've got to wait for that work to be done. And I think that is going to be a real barrier that a number of organisations are faced with.
Yeah, I mean, I've got personal experience of that on a project that we're dealing with at the moment, where we're told that the existing infrastructure won't be upgraded to take any additional load for another, I think it's 6 years in our case, which actually means that, you know, we're preparing a scheme which is planned to utilise ground source heat. It's got low surface temperature, floors, all the, you know, the main things that you want to do to achieve that net zero carbon infrastructure. And for the next, I suppose, probably 2 to 3 years after we've built it, we're going to be running on combined heat and power, which is just crazy. So, yeah, and it doesn't seem, I mean, again, so you've got that aspect, and you've also got the other part of it is electricity generation as well. So you've kind of, you know, through the solar farm, managed to get around that element. But we don't have that luxury. We are hostage to, you know, that capacity within the network as opposed to just the network itself.
There's obviously sleeve arrangements that people can go into that could be a solar farm in Scotland, but you sleeve it into your organisation. But that comes with transportation costs, and that's why we went for direct wire. But I think we have got the solar farm. We've got a number of arrays on various roofs within the health board, and we've got a number of air source heat pumps, and they work well together. But I think retrofitting air source heat pumps and some of these technologies, you've got to go in with your eyes open. And sometimes you look at the cost of the kit, and what you forget is you're connecting it to a system that's probably needs investment anyway. So when you connect the new air source heat pump, suddenly you go, that control has been dodgy for a year. I need to change that. And additional costs come out of the woodwork. But with the question about how can architects and designers help, I think it's looking at the technologies and looking at these new technologies and trying, if not design them in now, design the capability to utilise them in. And I know that a number of boilers now are coming with hydrogen capability. Now, whether those networks come in the next 3, 5, 10 years, I don't know. But it's trying to give buildings that flexibility. We're trying to do some trials with small wind turbines, but we've seen data on them, but trying to get the funding to give it a go, to prove concept is quite difficult, especially when capital is in short supply.
Yeah, it's a real dilemma, isn't it? I mean, as you say, that most estates will have been done on the basis of steam mains, which is obviously high temperature generation. So your dual fuel can run on that system. But as soon as you switch over to air source or ground source heat, then you're into a low temperature solution, aren't you? And as you say, you know, that does require significant infrastructure investment to make that work efficiently.
What we've done for our two main sites, we've actually developed a de-steam decarbonised plan, very simply replacing steam boilers, but then using the air source heat pump circuit as a provider for a water source heat pump, so that you use that low temp to get the high temperatures that we need in certain areas within the hospital. But being honest, I said about the 6 years earlier, part of that is the time we need. It isn't just about the primary heat source, it's your secondary circuits. Your radiators need to be changed because the one you had was designed on a bigger temperature difference. And therefore, you've got to build that into the project. But it can be done, and the expertise is out there. And we're very lucky in the UK with the number of companies with the skills and the talents to support these projects.
And have you had any opportunities to look at a kind of district heating sort of system? So obviously hospitals, you know, it's a 24-hour demand really, obviously with peaks and troughs. But if that's, you know, and you mentioned about getting the storage battery to try and smooth some of those peaks and troughs out. But I know, again, I suppose with an eye to that kind of commercial funding, whether there's been any sort of exploration of part of a wider system whereby you can use the fact that, for instance, I guess in houses, it's not a 24-hour demand, it's a significantly lower demand in the evenings, and therefore that might actually provide a place to dump heat or to, you know, dump energy or whatever and suck it back out at different times. Has that been at all on the cards? Or
in Swansea, a couple of years, we lost part of our former estate. There was a reorganisation of the NHS in Wales. So in Bridgend, we had been talking with the council about two of our sites being like primary heat source within a heat network. I think the problem I see it is if somebody knocked on my door and said, throw that gas boiler that's working fine out and take heat from us, but it's going to cost you more money to do it, I'd be a little loath to jump on board straight away. I think where we have to look for our heat networks and those developments is through the longer term planning of housing in the UK. And we've just been consulting on their heat policy for Wales, and that's been out to consultation. I've been part of that process. And one of the things from that is it's making new housing and new developments think about heat networks when they're being built. And as you said earlier, it's always easier when it's brand new and you can design it the right way, right, trying to retrofit it. But I think some of our hospitals are heat networks within their own right. If you use a 2 megawatt heat demand as a target for a heat network, some of our buildings are 3 or 4 megawatts on their own. And the funding stream hasn't been there for heat networks for health in Wales, whereas I know of a number of projects in Leeds and Liverpool Vital that is one of our partners for our energy schemes that have been working on. And I'm aware that investment's going in, and once that infrastructure's in place, you can get people to tap into it. But as a health board, we haven't looked at that other than trying to establish our own heat networks on our own sites, but one of our sites is right next door to Swansea University. So there is potential there, but at the moment it's just that, and we haven't started the discussions. But that's something that we will be looking to start talking to them about. Is there an opportunity to work together on something? Because as you say, we're there all the time, they're not. And it may be beneficial for them to link into our systems. But as I say, that's just a possible, maybe, perhaps in the future.
And what about, again, I suppose, which combines two things, is are you starting to look towards using more towards electric vehicles, and then you can use the batteries in the electric vehicles to, again, smooth out some of those demands? Is that something that you've got much experience of? Yeah,
most of our fleet will have swapped over to electric by April of this year. There's been a national project looking at EV charging across the site. But one of the problems we have on a couple of our sites is we're already at near the maximum demand for those sites, and we haven't got the infrastructure at the moment existing to support EV charging. And then, so if we do something, it'll have to be new. But as I said earlier, you've then got anything that's got a battery in it has the potential to feed back into the grid. So we need to have those discussions with getting new supplies onto the site and working with the grid on the additional demand. It is something we're looking at. But then you have the query of, do you go for the 7 kilowatt chargers that people could come, park and leave and come back in a few hours, or a few of the rapid chargers with a high capacity that will charge in 30 minutes. So there's a large capital investment required for that. Any new building, we're looking to provide 10% of the staffing with charging. Whether that will be needed is another question. And if you've ever visited a hospital anywhere in the UK, managing a car parking space, people will park anywhere. Believe you me.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's a pavement, a side of the road, or a double yellow. And if they want to park there, I think it's a lot different when you're in a commercial car park than if somebody, well, my son's just been brought into hospital, I needed to get into ED, I don't care. Well, that bay can't be used then. And the other issue with fast charging, if staff leave the car there, they can't leave it there all the time. So it's then the choice of the slow charging facilities as well as the rapid charge. So all the health boards in Wales are looking to do it, and their own fleet. By April, I think it's next year, we should have nearly all the fleet onto the chargers. But I do understand there's a delay through getting EV vans, certain sizes, purely because of the demand. So there are a number of projects in Wales ongoing to improve the level of EV charging, but it comes with a number of challenges that not everybody have resolved. One of the main ones being funding.
So we come back to, again, I suppose, that the cheapest way to reduce your revenue cost is probably to reduce the size of your estate. And as you've mentioned, you've been hampered somewhat because of changes in healthcare delivery. But I think ultimately that's still going to form a key part of any strategy going forward as we look to divest the acute estate of functions that could be delivered maybe through a primary estate or at home. And you mentioned digital technologies, I know it's one of those, it's a bit like the 15-minute city thing, isn't it? The digital wards and things, which actually means your own bed at home, but with suitable surveillance. I suppose, as you say, what are the things that we need to do to start to unlock that? It's been talked about for a number of years now, and I think every time we try to try it.
So if we can solve it now, it'd be good, quite good, wouldn't it? I think one of the things that often goes unknown, that if you go into hospital and you have a care package, my understanding is within 48 hours, social service will cancel that care package. So if you go into hospital as a patient with a care package required, that you're in 3 days, the care package is cancelled. Before you can go home from hospital, your care package and home has to be reassessed based on the new clinical risk. That delays you leaving hospital. That means that bed is occupied. Traditionally, we've got 70 to 80 patients that could leave hospital at any point in time, but can't purely because care packages aren't in place. And we need to get better at managing that. But you're right, people's expectations of healthcare, and I think there's a real move to value-based healthcare from a clinical point of view, and that's not treating the illness, treating the individual, and making care far more tailored to the individual. Just because you've got an illness doesn't mean that you have to have the operation, because that operation may bring you some benefit, but it comes with a risk. And it's a whole field value healthcare. But I think it's going to be changing how we think about the delivery of services. The key of making them more accessible, nearer the individual, but also about being personalised to the individual. The importance of listening to what somebody needs. There's no point giving somebody a new knee if there's a risk it will not give them more movement, and they're great as they are, but they've got a little bit of pain. And I think it's, as clinicians battle with the concept of valuing health on an individual basis, we have got to change the way we deliver healthcare. I mean, before the pandemic, the thought of having a GP appointment over Teams would have been laughed at because, I can't make a clinical decision based on somebody the other side of the camera. I need to see them in person. But look where we are now. I mean, how many people use the phone on their desk anywhere near the amount they used to? You use Teams, you use Zoom, whatever platform it is within your organisation. It has fundamentally changed the way we think and behave in work. The flexibility that people expect about working from home is a paradigm shift. We need to change where and how we provide health. But that comes with a massive challenge because we've got the buildings we've got now and we haven't got money to build new ones. So we've got to think differently and work differently. There's a number of examples through the pandemic where organisations use different facilities that were more open plan, that they improved their throughput because it helped the services. We all remember the pictures of Nightingale wards where the staff or sister could sit at one end and they'd see all the patients. We're moving to a model where everybody's in a single room. Well, if everybody's in a single room, seeing them and seeing to their needs is hard. It takes more people to walk in the patch. Whereas in the same way, when we moved to the pandemic and you had a lot of the outpatients facilities provided in a more open plan way, the flow improved because there wasn't this siloed management of the patient pathway. It worked much better. And that, I think, coming back to an earlier question, is where architects can really help. It's how do we change the way we design and deliver a state to reflect the changes in healthcare provision. A lot of design guides for the HBNs for health, I'm not quite sure how often they're revisited. I know it isn't every year, and I think we've got real challenges to modernise how we look at how we provide health and how we cater to the needs of individuals.
I mean, the HBN thing, I think you're spot on. I mean, I suspect it's probably taken on average somewhere between 5 and 8 years to refresh each one, which is completely out of kilter, as you say, with developments over the last few years. So again, it comes back to that flexibility thing, doesn't it? I think, again, It's new forms of spaces, isn't it, where we can say, okay, this works now. We can see how that would work in a more digitally orientated thing. And again, you get into your pandemic planning, which allows separation of elective and emergency to happen.
Don't want to go too much off the tangent, but one of the other things is the information systems. because what's been talked about within our own health board is the fact that wards they manage the 28 patients that are in front of them. But that doesn't always mean that the risk that they're managing on that ward and the decision they're making, if they were aware of the person that was sat in ED that had come in, they may make a different decision about whether that person's fit to go home or not. And if we have a major incident or we have a massive RTA, there will be a different mindset applied to the decision to send people home. That doesn't mean it's wrong, it's just different. And it's how do we apply those different approaches so that we see everything in the building? And that's the information systems. That's the point I was getting to. When we design our hospitals and facilities, we've got to make them more interactive. And what I mean by that is the information about the department is shared quicker so that the decisions that can be made about clinic people's treatment are made based on the whole picture rather than that 28 patients on a ward. It's a whole challenge for clinicians that they're battling with now.
I am for Gareth on the spot here. So what, Gareth, you've had some of the great work that Swansea are doing, but what else do you think interventions can trusts and health boards make to decarbonise?
I suppose it depends on the degree. I mean, clearly Swansea are a significant distance down that particular pathway. So as you say, a lot of the low-hanging fruit has already been plucked. I guess, for other estates who maybe are just at the beginning of that journey, there's certainly the existing estate. There's an analysis of that estate, which is we've got our own toolkits which are developed to make that process a little bit easier for clients to understand and understand where the investment should be targeted, whether that be upgrading the windows from single glazed to double glazed or LED investments, etc. So I think there's bits around that absolutely we can do. I think, Des has covered all of them really. More efficient use of the space, reduction of that space by trying to get those services out, creating a zero carbon ready estate for when the technologies do come online. I think all of that is there. It just requires, it requires two things. One is capital investment, which is probably is the most difficult thing to get. But it requires the vision as well. And again, I don't know. I don't know if it's unique to Swansea that you've got somebody like yourself, Des, in that key role who's driving that agenda. But again, it'd be interesting if you looked across the entire estate, how many organisations have somebody, with that level of knowledge that can evaluate and assess and define that pathway for the estate.
I think in Wales, all the health boards now, as a requirement of Welsh Government, have got decarbonisation action plans from April last year. And a number of them are going down the same journey. And in the same way, if I've got an issue they've dealt with, I'll ring their head of estates or director and having the conversation over a coffee and what were the problems, where were the challenges, is worth its weight in gold, because often we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to learn and evolve, and some of that can be done quite easily. We've tried to share with a number of organisations in Wales and others by doing things like that, to share our experiences, because that's how we get there as public bodies, by learning from each other, seeing what we did well and make it better. And things that worked, from doing a meeting and making sure you took a box of chocolates when you were trying to get rooms released, or doing a video of the work rather than trying to explain it. Because doing a video of when we were doing the light replacements, we did a video so the sister could see, look, this is what we're going to do. If you tell us we can't work anymore because of the clinical, this is what we'll do. And this is how long it will take. And you can watch it. 15 minutes and a box of roses made a huge difference, because then once we did one ward and the other sisters came and said, oh, the lighting's better, it's far better and doesn't look as dingy, brought a willingness to work with us. And I'm quite proud of the fact that we delivered the project on time, on cost, through the pandemic. And that came from a lot of having a small but very dedicated project team overseeing it, but also working with our partner on the project, Vital, and working with the management team to be flexible and say, oh, we've got one of the intensive care unit rooms is empty, you can get in it now, and being flexible to drop what we were doing and go and do that piece of work. And I think there are challenges, but there are ways of getting around them. And I think by working together and sharing what learning we have helps everyone.
And Des, what are the lessons learned that you found from doing all the work that you've done? What would you recommend going forward, or what would you have done differently?
I think for the NHS, it may be different in certain organisations, but often these projects, the decarb, although I lead on it, it was more, oh, we've had this fire through, Des, will you meet with them and try and take it forward? And it often becomes on top of the day job. And I think for me, some of the lessons learned within Wales, the refit programme, where we got support from Welsh Energy Services, local partnerships, where we got free advice and support, we dedicated a day a week to do the contract documentation over months. Every Wednesday we'd meet all day to do it, and having that push and support made a big difference. But we then, when we were doing the project, we appointed an internal project manager to work alongside the technical project manager, because the technical one would say, right, we need to close theatre next Tuesday, and that just isn't going to happen. Whereas the other project manager could work with the clinicians and the management teams to look, we need to do this, we can come in Friday night, if you can finish early on Friday afternoon. And that worked. Having a small, dedicated team to the project made a real difference. And understanding your own internal processes, but Welsh Government's in ours, because we got all our plans signed off by the board by August, and we were all chomping at the bit to start the project. It went into Welsh Government. A minister died. They stopped business for a month. Then there was an election, and we were all going, we're meant to finish this by March. And it was a real touch and go at one point about getting the permissions. But that's the lessons we learned about having a dedicated team, thinking differently about how you communicate things. Because often if you tell a ward, or we're shutting all your heating off, then they want blankets, extra staff. But if you tell them at midnight that the heating's gone off, they'll work with you. And it's about getting rid of some of the myths of how bad it's going to be, and working with the services to try and deliver the project in a way that they can understand and they can see it's not scary as they may think.
Okay, thank you very much, Des. I don't know if there's anything further you want to say, Gareth or Des, before we finish up and wrap up for today.
We are more than happy to talk to people if they're on the journey. Just a quick conversation if it helps, because I'm really keen to try and move down this pathway. We've got a PFI, and we're starting discussions with our PFI partner of how we integrate decarbonisation into the PFI hospital, because it's not in the contract, but it's a requirement. So we've got all these adventures to go off on, and helping somebody on the way is what makes this so enjoyable.
It certainly does. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Des, and you, Gareth, as well. And just to sum up a bit, really, I think there's obviously some very key challenges that the NHS are facing today. And I think it sounds like Swansea Health Board are doing leaps and bounds more than a lot of other people that I've certainly heard about. So thank you very much for sharing that. Just on another note, our decarbonisation toolkit can help trusts identify the carbon savings that can be made and the practical measures that can be implemented. You can find out more about this information on our toolkit via our website. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. You can find all our podcast episodes on our website. You can either subscribe via your preferred podcast platform. Thank you so much for listening. We look forward to seeing you again soon.